My family demanded I move out of my own house so my stepsister could have it. I said no, and the karma that followed was absolute perfection. My stepsister spent 22 years making sure everyone knew I wasn't her real brother, but the moment she went bankrupt, she showed up at my house with a moving truck and our entire extended family to force her way in. I didn't just lock the deadbolt in their faces, I exposed her manipulation in the middle of my driveway, turning her own army against her and setting off a chain reaction of karma I couldn't have planned better if I tried. The absolute audacity of the situation didn't fully hit me until I was staring across my own dining room table, watching my mother and my stepfather casually ask me to pack my bags and vacate the home I owned. I am 29 years old. If you had asked me a year ago who in my family despised me the most, the answer would have been instantaneous. My stepsister, Khloe. She is 32 now, and for over 2 decades, she made it her absolute life's mission to ensure I knew my place as an unwanted outsider. The sickening irony? She only remembered we were family when she decided she was entitled to my property. My biological father passed away when I was just 4 years old. I barely have any memories of him, just fragmented images of a man pushing me on a swing set. When I was 7, my mother married Arthur. Arthur was a quiet, non-confrontational man who came with a daughter from a previous marriage, Khloe, who was 3 years older than me. As a lonely kid, I was ecstatic. I had always begged my mother for an older sibling. I thought I was finally getting the big, happy family I'd always dreamed of. I thought my life was about to become whole. Instead, it turned into a psychological war zone. On the day our parents got married, there was a small reception in our backyard. I remember walking over to Khloe in my itchy little suit, holding a small gift box. Inside was a cheap friendship bracelet I had bought using chore money I'd been saving for weeks. It had both of our initials engraved on a tiny, fake silver charm. To a 7-year-old, it was a massive gesture. I held it out to her, smiling so hard my cheeks hurt. She looked at the bracelet for exactly 2 seconds, slapped my hand away, and sneered, "I'm not your sister. Don't ever call me that." I just stood there, frozen, while a few nearby adults chuckled awkwardly, assuming she was just being a shy, moody 10-year-old adjusting to a blended family. But she wasn't being shy. She meant every single syllable. From that day forward, Khloe made it her personal, unrelenting mission to remind me exactly where I stood in the hierarchy of our home. If anyone at school accidentally referred to us as brother and sister, she would immediately stop whatever she was doing to correct them, loudly and aggressively. If relatives introduced us together at Thanksgiving, she would interrupt and explain that we shared 0 blood and weren't actually related. Whenever her friends came over to the house, she would point at me and say, "That's just my dad's wife's kid. Ignore him." She never once introduced me as her brother. Not a single time in 22 years. At first, I kept trying. Kids are stupidly optimistic. I would ask if she wanted to play video games, she would roll her eyes and slam her bedroom door in my face. I would ask if she wanted to ride bikes, she would wait until I went inside to get my helmet, then pedal away with her friends without me. I even tried including her whenever my few friends came over, figuring maybe if we just spent more time together, her icy exterior would melt. Instead, she weaponized those moments. She would tell my friends deeply embarrassing, completely fabricated stories just to make them laugh at my expense. She once convinced my entire 6th grade class that I still slept with a nightlight because I was terrified of the dark. Another time, she told the neighborhood kids that I wet the bed until I was 11. Completely made up, but she loved crafting these lies because she knew people rarely bothered to verify the truth. Arthur corrected her occasionally, but never in a way that actually mattered or carried consequences. He would sigh heavily, rub his temples, and say, "Khloe, please be nice to your brother." She would instantly snap back, "He is not my brother." Arthur would just throw his hands up, tell her to stop arguing, and walk away. That was the extent of his parenting. There were never any groundings. There were never any revoked privileges. My mother constantly made excuses, telling me that Khloe was still grieving her parents' divorce and just needed patience. Apparently, that required patience had a timeline of over 2 decades. Things deteriorated even further after my younger half-sister, Lily, was born. Khloe absolutely adored Lily because they shared the same biological father. She would constantly tell Lily, right in front of me, that she had one real sister and one fake brother. Lily was way too young to understand the malicious intent, but hearing those words repeated daily eventually confused her enough that she started asking our parents why Khloe hated me so much. Even then, nobody truly addressed the toxic environment. Everyone in that house just wanted peace, and I learned very quickly that keeping Khloe happy was vastly more important to them than holding her accountable for her cruelty. So, to protect my own sanity, I completely stopped trying. By the time I reached high school, we existed as ghosts to one another. We barely spoke unless absolutely necessary. She spent her weekends going to massive parties, shopping for expensive clothes, and acting like royalty. I spent my weekends working grueling shifts at a local hardware store, hauling bags of mulch and mixing paint. I saved every single paycheck because I wanted out of that house the second I turned 18. Khloe would actively laugh at me whenever she saw me coming home covered in dirt, exhausted from working overtime. She used to taunt me, saying I was throwing away my youth while she was actually living life to the fullest. Maybe she was right in the short term. I didn't have the carefree, exciting teenage years she did. I didn't travel to Cancun for spring break. I didn't wear designer labels. I didn't have my parents finance a brand new car for me. I worked, I studied, and I hoarded my money like my life depended on it. After graduation, my hard work paid off. I earned a substantial scholarship to study mechanical engineering at a solid state university. I continued working night shifts as a security guard to pay for my living expenses, graduated with practically zero student debt, and immediately landed a fantastic job designing manufacturing equipment for a major firm. I slowly, meticulously built a career. I wasn't a millionaire by any stretch, but I was incredibly financially stable before I even hit my late 20s. More importantly, I stayed entirely out of debt. Every raise I got went straight into high-yield savings. Every annual bonus went into an investment portfolio specifically earmarked for a down payment. 4 years ago, I finally bought my first house. It wasn't a massive mansion. It was a modest, older home in a quiet, established neighborhood. 3 bedrooms, 1 small office, a decent-sized backyard with mature oak trees, and a detached garage that desperately needed a new roof. It was definitely a fixer-upper, but it had incredible bones and endless potential. I spent almost every single weekend for 2 years renovating that house with my own 2 hands. I ripped out the hideous 1970s carpet and laid down beautiful hardwood flooring. I completely gutted and remodeled the kitchen, installing new cabinets and quartz countertops myself. I repainted every single room, landscaped the overgrown yard, and even rebuilt the rotting back deck with the help of a guy from work. By the time I was finally finished, it looked absolutely nothing like the dilapidated property I had originally purchased. It looked like a home. I was fiercely proud of every single square inch of that property because I had bled, sweat, and sacrificed to earn it. Meanwhile, Khloe's life had gone in the exact opposite direction. She married a guy named Marcus, who made a very comfortable living running a mid-sized commercial roofing company. Together, they easily earned enough to live a great life, but comfortable was never enough for Khloe. They constantly needed to project immense wealth. They leased 2 luxury SUVs they swapped out every year, financed absurdly expensive modern furniture, took lavish vacations to Europe every summer, and relentlessly posted highly curated pictures online to ensure everyone knew they were living their best life. Every Christmas, she would proudly parade around with a new designer handbag that cost more than my mortgage payment. Every birthday party she threw for her 3 kids looked like a catered corporate event. Whenever relatives complimented my house at family gatherings, Khloe would roll her eyes, shrug indifferently, and say it was cute for a bachelor who lives completely alone. The one and only time she actually visited my house after I finished the massive renovations, she walked through every single room with a scowl, refusing to say a single positive word. Right before she walked out the front door, she looked around the open concept living area and muttered, "Seems like a massive waste for just one person to hoard all this space." At the time, I brushed it off as just another classic, bitter Khloe comment. Looking back now, I realize that was the exact moment she started viewing my home not as my accomplishment but as a resource she inherently deserved more than I did. We rarely spoke after that day. Holidays were the only time we occupied the same physical space, and even then, she would barely acknowledge my existence unless she needed something heavy lifted, a toy fixed, or a piece of furniture assembled. It was darkly hilarious to me how I wasn't family for 364 days of the year, but the moment manual labor was required, I was suddenly expected to step up. Then, last winter, her entire house of cards collapsed. Marcus's roofing business started hemorrhaging money after 2 massive commercial contracts fell through due to supply chain issues and poor management. Instead of doing the logical thing, downsizing, cutting personal expenses, and weathering the storm, they doubled down on their delusion. They refinanced their vehicles, maxed out multiple high-limit credit cards, and somehow convinced themselves that if they just projected success, another huge contract would magically appear to save them. It didn't. Within 8 months, the business imploded completely. The bankruptcy was messy and public. Creditors came aggressively after the company equipment. Their luxury vehicles were repossessed in the middle of the night, and they fell over 6 months behind on the rent for their massive McMansion. The pressure broke them. One rainy Tuesday morning, Marcus packed a single large suitcase, told Khloe he absolutely could not handle the stress or her constant screaming anymore, and walked out the door. He completely abandoned them. Nobody heard from him for weeks. Suddenly, Khloe found herself completely unemployed, drowning in insurmountable debt, with 3 young children and absolutely nowhere to go. After the landlord officially finalized the eviction process, she had no choice but to move back into Arthur and my mother's house. Unfortunately for her, that house only had 4 bedrooms. One obviously belonged to my parents. One belonged to Lily, who was currently living at home while commuting to a local nursing program. The third had been permanently converted into Arthur's hobby room and office after his retirement. That left Khloe and her 3 highly energetic, undisciplined children squeezed into a single, standard-sized guest bedroom. According to the exhausted phone calls I received from my mother, everyone in that house was absolutely miserable within the first 2 weeks. The children fought constantly because they had zero personal space. Khloe complained relentlessly about everything: the quality of the groceries my parents bought, the speed of the Wi-Fi, the temperature of the house. She expected my mother to provide free, full-time babysitting while she supposedly looked for a job. Yet, months dragged by without her securing a single interview. Arthur was quietly draining his retirement savings to cover her personal expenses because she claimed she couldn't handle the stress of being broke. Every conversation I had with my mother inevitably devolved into a long, weeping complaint about how exhausted and financially drained she was. I sympathized with her, truly, but I maintained a strict boundary. I stayed entirely out of it. It wasn't my circus, and it certainly wasn't my monkeys. Then came the Saturday afternoon that permanently shattered my relationship with my family. My mother called me early in the morning, her voice trembling slightly, asking if she and Arthur could stop by my house because they desperately needed to discuss something incredibly important. Given her tone, I honestly thought someone had been diagnosed with a terminal illness. I told them to come right over. When they arrived, they sat at my dining room table looking unusually pale and nervous. My mother kept wringing her hands and absolutely refused to make eye contact with me. Arthur cleared his throat loudly, shifted in his chair, and finally broke the suffocating silence. "Liam, we've been doing a lot of thinking about Khloe's living situation," he began, his voice tight. I nodded slowly, keeping my face completely neutral. I stayed quiet, waiting for the punchline. He continued, "Your house, it has plenty of room, 3 bedrooms, a big yard. It's safe." The second those words left his mouth, a heavy, icy pit formed in my stomach. I instantly knew exactly where this insane conversation was heading, and I knew with absolute certainty that the next few minutes were going to irrevocably change my life. Arthur leaned forward, folding his hands together on my table as if he were about to negotiate a corporate merger rather than asking his stepson for a life-altering, monumental favor. "Your mother and I were thinking that maybe Khloe and the kids could stay here with you for a little while," he said, forcing a tight, unconvincing smile. "Just until she gets back on her feet and figures things out." I stared at him. Then I looked at my mother, who was now intensely studying the wood grain of the table. "How long exactly is a little while?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Arthur shrugged, looking away. "A few months, maybe? Just through the end of the year." That vague, non-committal answer alone told me everything I needed to know. Nobody had actually thought this through. A few months, in family favor time, easily translates to a year, which then translates to permanent residency. "Has she actually found a job yet?" I asked. My mother quietly admitted she hadn't. "Is she actively interviewing anywhere?" I pressed. Another long, agonizingly uncomfortable silence filled the dining room. Arthur finally mumbled that she had been focusing entirely on getting the children emotionally settled first. That sounded incredibly suspicious, considering she had already been living at their house for nearly 4 months. Then, my mother finally looked up. Her eyes were red. She took a deep breath and dropped the real bomb. "Liam, she actually had another idea," my mother whispered nervously. "We know you like your privacy. So, we think maybe it would be easier if you just came and stayed with us for a while instead." I blinked. I genuinely thought I had suffered a minor stroke and misheard her. "Stayed with you? What do you mean?" My mother nodded carefully, as if she were approaching a wild animal. "Just temporarily, honey. You could take the guest room. That way the children wouldn't have to be cramped, and your house already has enough bedrooms for all of them. It makes the most logical sense." I actually laughed out loud. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a harsh, barking laugh born of pure, unadulterated disbelief. It was so profoundly absurd that my brain literally short-circuited trying to process the sheer audacity of the request. "So, let me make sure I am understanding this perfectly," I said, leaning forward and resting my arms on the table. "Khloe doesn't just want to stay with me. She wants me to physically pack my belongings, move out of my own home, the home I bought, the home I pay the mortgage on, the home I spent 2 years rebuilding, so she can move into it." Arthur immediately held his hands up defensively. "Now, Liam, don't frame it like that. It's not like that at all." "Then explain to me exactly how it's different, Arthur," I challenged, staring a hole right through him. He opened his mouth, desperately searched for a rational explanation, failed completely, and closed it again. My mother tried to step in, her voice pleading, "Honey, you are one person, you don't need all this space. She is raising 3 growing children, they are sleeping on air mattresses. It breaks my heart." Another heavy silence fell over the room. I leaned back in my chair and slowly looked around the dining room. I looked at the custom trim I had installed myself. I looked at the light fixtures I had wired. I remembered spending entire weekends covered head to toe in itchy fiberglass insulation and drywall dust because I couldn't afford to hire professional contractors. I had built this sanctuary. And now, they were sitting in it, asking me to surrender it because my childhood tormentor had ruined her own life and decided she deserved the fruits of my labor. Did Khloe actually ask for this directly? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Arthur sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. It was her suggestion, yes. Of course it was. My mother reached across the table and gently touched my hand. Liam, please, she is under a tremendous amount of stress. She's desperate. I firmly, but gently, pulled my hand away from hers. Mom. She spent 22 years telling me, and everyone else who would listen, that I was not family. She made my childhood a living hell. That was a long time ago, Arthur interjected quickly. She was just a kid. Really? I shot back. Because last Christmas, less than 10 months ago, her youngest son asked who I was. Do you remember how she introduced me, Arthur? She told a 5-year-old that I was Grandpa Arthur's wife's son. She couldn't even bring herself to use the word stepbrother. Neither of them said a word. They both knew it was true. Has she apologized for any of it? I asked, my voice rising just a fraction. Has she ever admitted she treated me like garbage? Has she even picked up the phone to call me herself to ask for this massive future favor? My mother looked down at her lap and quietly whispered, no. So, I summarized, she doesn't think she owes me an ounce of respect or an apology, but she genuinely believes I owe her my entire house. Arthur's face flushed red, and he became visibly irritated. Nobody is asking you to give away your house, Liam, it's temporary. If I move out, and she moves in with 3 kids, without paying rent, without signing a legally binding lease, and without a hard move-out date, what exactly am I doing, Arthur? I'm giving her my house. I shook my head in disgust. I've read enough horror stories to know exactly how this ends. 3 months becomes 6, 6 months becomes a year. And when I finally demand my house back, I'm the villain who is forcing innocent children out onto the street. You would never support me kicking them out. I looked at both of them and delivered my final verdict. No. Not maybe. Not let me think about it. The answer is absolutely, unequivocally, no. My mother instantly burst into tears, burying her face in her hands. Arthur looked at me with a mixture of profound disappointment and deep offense. I really thought we raised you to help family, he said bitterly. That single sentence ignited a fury inside me that I hadn't felt in years. Family? I practically spat the word. That is an incredibly interesting word coming from you, Arthur. Where was all this passionate family talk when Khloe spent 2 decades telling everyone I wasn't her brother? Where were you when she bullied me in my own home? He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. She was a kid. People change. Has she? I demanded. Because from where I'm sitting, the only thing that has changed is that she ran out of money and needs something I have. My mother, sobbing softly, begged me to at least consider letting Khloe and the kids move in while I remained in the house. You could just share the space, she pleaded. Absolutely not. I refused instantly. Why are you being so cold? She cried. Because she would never leave. Mom, she already believes she is inherently entitled to my house. You don't think she would immediately start taking over? Then what happens when I want her out? You'll beg me to wait just a little longer because moving the kids again would be traumatic. I refused to set myself on fire to keep her warm. Neither of them answered. They couldn't, because they both knew my prediction was 100% accurate. The dynamic of my entire childhood had always been that the reasonable person me had to compromise to appease the unreasonable person, Khloe. I was refusing to play the game anymore. Arthur finally stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. I am deeply disappointed in you, Liam. I'm disappointed we even had to ask. I'm disappointed you had the nerve to ask, I replied coldly. They left shortly afterward. My mother hugged me at the door, but it felt incredibly tense, like she knew a massive line had been crossed. Arthur simply marched to his truck without looking back. I locked the door behind them, let out a massive breath, and honestly believed that would be the end of it. I had set my boundary. They had heard me. It was over. I was incredibly naive. 3 days later, all hell broke loose. I was sitting in a mid-morning project management meeting at work when my phone started vibrating furiously in my pocket. It didn't stop. Buzz after buzz after buzz. Since I was presenting, I ignored it until I got back to my desk at lunch. When I finally unlocked my screen, my jaw dropped. I had 22 missed calls and over 50 unread text messages. Most of them were from extended relatives I hadn't spoken to in months, some in years. The very first text I opened was from my Aunt Brenda. It simply read, "How could you be so utterly heartless?" Another text from a cousin said, "Those poor kids deserve better than a selfish monster for an uncle." Completely bewildered and feeling a rising sense of panic, I opened Facebook for the first time in weeks. Right at the very top of my feed was a massive, multi-paragraph public post from Khloe. She hadn't explicitly used my name, but she painted a picture so clear it didn't matter. She wrote a tragic, tear-jerking saga about being horribly abandoned by her husband, struggling to keep her 3 beautiful children fed, and having a wealthy, single relative with a massive, empty house who cruelly refused to help because he cared more about his pristine hardwood floors than his own flesh and blood. She actually wrote, and I quote, "My babies are sleeping on the floor, crying because someone who claims to love this family slammed the door in our faces when we begged for shelter." That specific lie made my blood boil, considering she had never once stepped foot on my porch to ask me anything. She finished the post by stating she prayed her children would never grow up to be as cold, bitter, and materialistic as some people. The post had absolutely blown up. There were hundreds of reactions and dozens of comments from family members, mutual friends, and complete strangers calling me a sociopath, a narcissist, and a monster. The worst part wasn't the strangers, it was my own relatives agreeing with her. People who had sat at Thanksgiving tables and watched her relentlessly bully and reject me for 20 years were suddenly acting like I was legally and morally obligated to rescue her from her own financial ruin. I didn't reply to the post. I didn't defend myself in the comments. Instead, I calmly took high-resolution screenshots of every single paragraph and every single nasty comment from my relatives. My gut told me this escalation was far from over. About an hour later, my phone rang again. The caller ID flashed Khloe's name. Against my better judgment, I stepped into an empty conference room and answered it. She didn't even say hello. "You embarrassed mom," she snapped, her voice dripping with venom. I actually laughed. "I embarrassed mom? You're the one airing dirty laundry on Facebook. She cried for 2 days because you flat out refused to help us when we are drowning," Khloe accused. "No," I replied smoothly. "She cried because she finally realized how completely insane and ridiculous your demand was, and she knew I wasn't going to roll over for you." Khloe's tone instantly shifted from victim to dictator. "You are seriously going to make my children suffer over some pathetic childhood grudge? Grow up, Liam." "This has absolutely nothing to do with childhood," I said. "This is about the fact that you are demanding I move out of the house that I own and pay for." She sighed dramatically, playing the role of the exhausted, reasonable mother dealing with a petulant child. "You don't even need all that space, it's selfish. You're hoarding a house you barely use. That is not your decision to make," I answered, keeping my voice dangerously level. "Maybe I am selfish. But selfish people usually don't spend 22 years telling someone they aren't family, only to turn around and demand the keys to their property." She went dead quiet for a few seconds. When she finally spoke, she said something that genuinely sent a chill down my spine. "Dad agrees with me. And so does everyone else." That single, arrogant sentence told me everything I needed to know about her mindset. She genuinely believed she was going to win. She had spent her entire life getting exactly what she wanted because Arthur would rather surrender than deal with her tantrums. She thought she could just bully me into submission using the rest of the family as a weapon. "Arthur's disappointment doesn't pay my mortgage," I said coldly. I hung up the phone and blocked her number. I figured she would spend a few more days playing the victim online before eventually accepting reality and finding a cheap apartment. I couldn't have been more wrong. Khloe didn't do reality. The following Saturday morning, I was in my front yard, sweating through a t-shirt as I mowed the lawn. The neighborhood was quiet. Then, I noticed a large silver SUV slowly pull onto my street and park directly in my driveway. A few seconds later, a second car pulled up behind it. Then, a massive Ford pickup truck towing a large, enclosed utility trailer parked against the curb. My stomach immediately dropped into my shoes. I recognized the silver SUV, it was Arthur's. Before I could even reach down to shut off the lawnmower, the doors of the vehicle swung open, and people started climbing out. They weren't just visiting. They were carrying large, heavy cardboard moving boxes and plastic storage bins. For a brief, surreal second, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. I genuinely thought maybe they were dropping off donations for a charity drive somewhere in the neighborhood. Then, Khloe stepped out of the passenger side of the truck. She looked right at me, smiled like we were the best of friends, and shouted over the roar of the mower, "Perfect timing, we brought the first load." I killed the engine. The sudden silence in the yard was deafening. I walked toward the driveway, my heart pounding against my ribs. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded, looking at the small army of relatives gathering on my driveway. "Moving in," Khloe answered casually, adjusting her sunglasses as if she were simply stating the weather. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. 2 of my older cousins, guys I used to play baseball with, had already dropped the tailgate of the trailer and were hauling out a massive dresser. My Aunt Brenda, the same aunt who called me a monster on Facebook, was marching up my walkway carrying 3 overflowing grocery bags. Arthur was standing near his truck, looking incredibly uncomfortable, actively staring at his shoes to avoid looking at me. My mother wasn't there. That was the very first detail that clicked in my brain. "Have you completely lost your mind?" I asked Khloe, my voice rising in disbelief. "I told you no." She rolled her eyes exaggeratedly. "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Liam. Everyone talked about it, and we all agreed this is the best, Most practical solution for the kids. Who is everyone? I snapped. The people in this family, who actually care about each other. She shot back smugly. One of my cousins carrying the dresser paused, looking slightly confused. He offered an awkward, apologetic smile. Hey man, we figured once you talked things over with Arthur and cooled down, you'd be cool with it. We're just here to help with the heavy lifting. I looked dead at him. Did Arthur tell you I agreed to this? The cousin hesitated, glancing nervously at Arthur. Well, no. But Khloe said. Did anyone actually bother to ask me? I yelled, my voice echoing down the quiet suburban street. Nobody answered. Aunt Brenda froze on the walkway. Khloe stepped closer to me, lowering her voice and speaking in that condescending, sickeningly sweet tone you use to scold a toddler. Look, Liam, everyone knows you're incredibly stubborn. We figured once the kids were actually here, and the furniture was inside, you'd stop throwing this little tantrum and accept it. It's happening. Just open the door. I couldn't believe the sheer, psychopathic manipulation I was witnessing. She hadn't come to beg. She hadn't come to negotiate. She had decided to skip my consent entirely and rely entirely on overwhelming social pressure. She genuinely believed that if she showed up with half the extended family carrying her belongings, I would be too socially paralyzed and embarrassed to cause a scene and send them away. She thought I would just step aside and let her conquer my home. Unfortunately for her, she had severely miscalculated who I had become. I didn't say another word to her. I turned my back, walked straight past Aunt Brenda, marched up the steps to my front porch, unlocked my heavy front door, stepped inside, and slammed it shut. I immediately threw the deadbolt and locked the chain. Through the large front window, I watched the absolute chaos unfold. People were standing frozen in the driveway, holding boxes, looking incredibly confused. Khloe's smug smile vanished instantly, replaced by a mask of pure rage. 30 seconds later, my phone rang. It was Arthur. I answered it and put it on speaker. Open the door, Liam. Arthur said, his voice trembling with stress. Get off my property, Arthur, I replied coldly. All of you. Right now. Or I am calling the police and having every single one of you trespassed. I could hear Khloe screaming in the background. He's bluffing. He wouldn't dare call the cops on family. Try me, I said directly into the phone. Stop making a scene in my neighborhood. You are trying to break into a home you do not own. Arthur sighed, a ragged, defeated sound. Liam, please, the kids are standing out here in the heat. Just come outside and let's talk about this like adults. If the kids are hot, take them back to your house, I said. I am not opening this door until the trailer is packed and you are leaving. I hung up. 5 minutes of agonizing silence passed. I stood out of sight, watching through the blinds. Relatives were arguing in hushed tones. My cousins had set the dresser down on the concrete. Finally, there was a series of loud, heavy knocks on my front door. It was Arthur. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door exactly 3 inches, leaving the heavy brass security chain firmly in place. I glared out at him. Khloe was standing right behind his shoulder, practically vibrating with anger. The rest of the family had gathered on the lawn, watching the spectacle. Son, Arthur started, his eyes pleading. Do not call me son, I interrupted sharply, my voice loud enough for the entire yard to hear. Do not ever call me son when you are standing on my porch, trying to help a woman forcefully occupy my house after I explicitly told you no. Arthur's face crumpled. He looked older in that moment than I had ever seen him. He admitted, his voice cracking, that this entire ambush had been Khloe's master plan. He confessed that he only came along because Khloe convinced him that if he was there, I would listen to reason and back down to avoid humiliating the family. I looked at him with absolute disgust. I have one question for you, Arthur. If I showed up at your house right now, with a U-Haul full of my furniture, and demanded to move into your bedroom after you told me no, what would you do? He didn't answer. He just stared at the porch boards. Khloe pushed past him, grabbing the edge of the door. That is completely different and you know it. She shrieked. How? How? I demanded. Because you don't have children. She screamed, her face red. There it was. The ultimate trump card she had relied on her entire adult life. The delusion that giving birth automatically entitled her to the assets, property, and labor of everyone around her. I let go of the door, stepped back, and raised my voice so every single relative in the driveway could hear me clearly. Did any of you actually ask her if she was planning to pay rent? I yelled to the crowd. Silence. My cousins looked at each other nervously. Did any of you ask if she was going to pay the water bill, the electric bill, the property taxes? I continued. More dead silence. Aunt Brenda slowly lowered the grocery bag she was holding onto the grass. Did anyone ask her how long she was planning to stay in my house? I asked. Aunt Brenda cleared her throat awkwardly. She told us it would just be for 2 or 3 months, until she gets her new job sorted out. New. I turned my eyes back to Khloe, who was suddenly looking very panicked. How long, Khloe? I demanded. She crossed her arms defensively. Until I am financially stable again, Which means however long it takes. 6 months? I pushed. She shrugged aggressively. A year? 2 years? She refused to answer, she just glared at me. She didn't have to say it out loud. The silence was deafening, and in that moment, the collective realization washed over the entire driveway. Everyone finally understood exactly what I had known from the very beginning. There was no timeline. There was no plan. There was only a parasite looking for a host. She intended to move in, establish residency, and force me to legally evict my own nieces and nephews when I finally had enough. I looked directly at my 2 cousins. You guys took a Saturday off to haul furniture because she told you I agreed to this. I didn't. I told Arthur and my mother no 3 separate times. Khloe knew I said no. She lied to all of you to use you as muscle to intimidate me. Both of my cousins immediately walked over to the dresser, picked it up, and loaded it straight back into the trailer. One of them looked at me, shook his head, and muttered, "I am so sorry, Liam, we had no idea." Aunt Brenda looked horrified. She turned to Khloe. "Khloe, is that true? Did he actually say no?" Asked her back. "This city," and a commas. Khloe panicked. She instantly went on the defensive, her voice hitting a shrill, hysterical pitch. "He's twisting everything. He's a liar. Mom said he was considering it. I just wanted to expedite the process." I didn't argue. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, opened my text messages, and pulled up a conversation I had with my mother 2 days prior. I unhooked the door chain, stepped onto the porch, and handed the phone directly to Aunt Brenda. The messages were damning. They clearly showed my mother begging me one last time to reconsider, and my response was crystal clear. "Mom, for the final time, the answer is absolutely not. Khloe is not moving into my house under any circumstances. Do not ask me again." There was no misunderstanding. There were no mixed signals. Aunt Brenda read the glowing screen in silence. Her face turned bright red. She looked up at Khloe with a mixture of shock and utter disgust. Without saying a single word, Brenda handed my phone back, turned around, picked up her grocery bags, and marched straight back to her car. One by one, the relatives started putting boxes back into the vehicles. Nobody argued with me anymore. Nobody told me to reconsider or think of the children. They had all realized they had been masterfully manipulated into participating in a home invasion. Khloe completely lost her mind. She realized she was losing her army, and she snapped. She started screaming at the top of her lungs, flailing her arms. She accused my cousins of being spineless cowards. She accused Aunt Brenda of abandoning family. She screamed that I was a sociopath who had orchestrated this entire public humiliation just to get revenge on her. Finally, she turned her wrath on Arthur, violently shoving his shoulder and screaming that he was a pathetic excuse for a father because he wasn't forcing me to open the door. That is when the impossible happened. Arthur, the man who had spent 22 years avoiding conflict at all costs, the man who had let this monster terrorize my childhood just to keep the peace, finally broke. "Enough!" Arthur roared. The sound was so loud, so completely out of character, that the entire street went dead silent. Even the birds seemed to stop chirping. Arthur's face was purple with rage. He pointed a trembling finger directly at Khloe's face. "He told us no. He told us no days ago, and I told you we needed to respect that. You lied to me. You lied to the family. You dragged us all out here to ambush him, and I was stupid enough to let you bully me into it. This is over. Get in the truck." Khloe stared at him, her mouth hanging open in complete, unadulterated shock. You're taking his side?" she whispered, genuinely unable to comprehend the concept of being told no by her father. Arthur closed his eyes for a long second, taking a deep, shuddering breath. "I'm taking the side that is actually right, Khloe. For once in my life." It had taken 3 decades, a bankruptcy, and a driveway full of humiliated relatives, but Arthur had finally stopped asking the reasonable person to surrender to the tyrant. Khloe looked around the yard, desperately waiting for someone, anyone, to jump to her defense. Nobody did. My cousin slammed the trailer doors shut and locked the latch. Aunt Brenda started her car engine. The children, who had been sitting in the back seat of the SUV watching iPads, were completely silent, sensing the massive shift in gravity. Arthur looked entirely defeated. His shoulders slumped, and he looked incredibly old. Instead of accepting defeat gracefully, Khloe doubled down on the venom. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "You planned this," she hissed. "You've been waiting your whole pathetic life for a chance to ruin me because you're still crying that I never accepted you as a brother." I smiled. It was a cold, satisfied smile. "You're actually right about one thing, Khloe," I said smoothly. "You never accepted me as your brother. You spent 22 years correcting teachers, relatives, and your own friends. You made damn sure everyone knew we weren't family." I took a step closer to the edge of the porch. "But the absolute second you needed a free house, suddenly I'm your beloved brother? Suddenly we're blood?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. "Which is it, Khloe?" I demanded, my voice echoing. "Am I your brother, or am I just your dad's wife's kid?" She looked away, staring at the concrete. "That's exactly what I thought," I said. I turned around, walked back inside, and locked the door for good. Within 10 minutes, the driveway was completely empty. Update 2. It has been about 6 months since the driveway incident, and the fallout has been nothing short of spectacular. Later that evening, my mother finally came over. She had been at a church event when Khloe orchestrated the ambush and had no idea it was happening until Arthur came home and told her everything. She sat on my couch and cried, apologizing profusely for ever putting the idea in Khloe's head that my house was an option. She admitted that she had been terrified of Khloe's temper and was just trying to find an easy way out of the nightmare of living with her. I forgave my mom, but I made it incredibly clear that I was setting ironclad boundaries moving forward. I changed my locks the next day and installed a full ring security camera system around the perimeter of my property. Arthur and I had a very long, very painful lunch a few weeks later. He looked me in the eye and gave me the apology I had waited my entire life to hear. He admitted he had failed me as a parent. He said he spent his whole life giving in to Khloe because arguing with her was exhausting, but watching her try to steal my home and manipulate the entire family finally shattered his illusion. He realized he had created a monster. We are slowly rebuilding our relationship. It's not perfect, but for the first time, it's built on actual honesty and respect. As for Khloe, the karma she received was absolute poetry. Remember Aunt Brenda? The one who called me a monster on Facebook and brought grocery bags to the ambush. Well, after the driveway incident, Brenda decided to play the ultimate family martyr. She publicly announced that she was taking Khloe and the 3 kids into her cramped, 2-bedroom condo because real family never turns their back. It took exactly 3 months for Brenda to deeply regret that decision. Khloe, true to form, refused to get a job. She took over Brenda's master bedroom, forcing Brenda to sleep on a lumpy sofa in her own living room. Khloe ran up the electric bill, ate all the food, and treated Brenda like a live-in maid. When Brenda finally snapped and demanded Khloe start paying rent or leave, Khloe threatened to call Child Protective Services and report Brenda's condo as an unsafe living environment to tie her up in legal trouble. Last month, Aunt Brenda called me, sobbing uncontrollably. She begged me for a $3,000 loan to hire a lawyer to legally evict Khloe from the condo. I listened quietly to her cry for about 5 minutes. Then, I cleared my throat and said, "Aunt Brenda, I'm really surprised by this. I mean, those poor children deserve better. I really expected more compassion from you." I quoted her exact Facebook comment back to her word for word. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then I hung up and blocked her number. Eventually, Arthur forced Khloe to get a job working reception at a dental office. Between her meager income and the child support she finally managed to squeeze out of Marcus, who was found working under the table in another state, she was forced to rent a tiny, run-down apartment on the outskirts of town. It is a far cry from the luxury SUVs and designer bags she used to flaunt. I haven't spoken a single word to Khloe since the day I locked the door in her face. My life is peaceful, my house is quiet, and I sleep perfectly every single night knowing I finally stood up for myself. I didn't refuse to help her because I hate children. I refused because I will never set myself on fire to keep someone warm who spent 20 years trying to freeze me out.